We are coming back into regular session for our business meeting after leaving an executive session for the purposes of negotiation. So welcome to everyone who's joining us here for our public session. We will begin with public comment as we always do. I just want to see who's here. It doesn't seem to be a huge crowd tonight. Could you please put your name in the chat if you are planning to make a public comment? Okay, so it seems like we're not going to have any public comment to begin the meeting tonight. So therefore, I will just continue with the rest of my spiel. But I'm wondering if Theo is on. Theo's our student representative. Theo, are you on the call? Theo's not on yet. So I'll go ahead and do my quick chairs report and then we'll see if Theo's here. Oh my gosh, this is the one from last week. I can't say all that. Okay. Sorry. Every week seems the same right now. Anyway, I will just wing it. Okay, so welcome. Thanks for coming. Tonight we're going to be talking about the high school program of study. So we have Trisha with us and also doing some work on the budget. So thanks all for being with us. It's been not quite the return to school that we were hoping for due to Omicron, but I think everybody's been doing a great job holding it together and seems like things are going pretty well. So Theo, are you here? All right, we've got no Theo yet, as far as I can tell. I'll keep watching, and if everybody else will keep a watch on the participants and let me know if you see Theo pop up so that we can get our student report, that would be awesome. In the meantime, I'm ready to go along ahead with the consent agenda. Do I have a motion to accept the warrants? Which is vouchers 1023, 1024, 1025, and 1026, as well as the minutes from October 19th and November 2nd.
Sarah, this is Ken. I just have to abstain because I wasn't present, I think, for the 18th and the October, November meetings, I think.
Oh my gosh. Okay, no problem. Do I have a motion to approve the consent? Let's split the vouchers
Yeah,
and the minutes then. Do I have a motion just to approve the warrant, just to accept the warrants?
So moved, Warnock.
Okay, is there a second?
Second, Whitman.
Okay, is there any discussion on the vouchers? I spent time reading the vouchers. I noticed that 1023 was a lot about the facilities, and I was really impressed that we were able to salvage the boiler burner from the old Manchester Memorial School and bring it over to the Essex Elementary School. I think we're always doing our best to save money, and that was a great project. So kudos to you guys. We also, it's amazing how much money we have to spend on technology. I know we need it, and I know we do a great job with it, but I think that's part of our cost increase over the years must be all of these programs that we have to keep renewing and running. And that was kind of interesting to read about. And also, I was excited to see that we have a new writing curriculum called No Red Ink, and I had fun. I Googled it, I looked at it, it was awesome. Voucher number 1024 is mostly for the building project, and 1025 and 1026 were transfers from the student activity funds. That's my discussion. Okay, any other discussion? All in favor of passing the warrants? We have to go by roll call since we're remote. So Eric? Eric, are you a yes?
Yes.
Awesome.
Sorry.
Kate?
Yes.
That's okay. Chris?
Yes.
Teresa?
Yes.
Ken?
Warnock, yes.
Awesome. And I'm a yes. And then do I have a motion to approve the minutes from October 19th and November 2nd?
So moved, Burke.
Thank you, Eric. Is there a second?
Second, Kate.
Or is there any discussion of the minutes? All right. Eric, So roll call vote to pass the minutes. Eric? Are you a yes? Yes. Kate?
Yep.
Chris?
Yes.
Teresa?
Yes.
Ken's abstaining because he wasn't here, and I'm a yes. Okay, thanks, everybody. That's it for the consent agenda. And we do have some subcommittee reports tonight. We'll start with Teresa and Chris reporting on the elementary facilities.
Chris, you want to go ahead? Because I'll do the next one.
Yeah, sure. So the process is moving forward with the turf field replacement. It got delayed, I believe, a week. Ari, correct me if I'm wrong. But we do expect to get some bids in, and I believe within a 2-week period, we should be able to make a decision on the architect and start to move forward with the process. Ari, I'm not sure if you want to add some additional color to that, but
Oh, I think you got it perfectly. That's right.
okay.
So we're looking to the next step is just to see what type of bids we receive. So I think you nailed it. Thank you, Chris.
Yep.
All right. And then Finance Committee. Teresa, you going to do that one?
Sure. Yep. So since our last meeting, we had our first budget workshop of the season with the Essex Finance Committee and Boards of Selectmen, and any public who was interested in attending. Pam and Avi presented the year's budget, answered any questions. We had some feedback in between from the Essex Board of Selectmen, just letting us know that they hope that while we move forward, we'll continue to do our best to keep the growth spending year over year low, which of course Pam and Avi always do. And our next budget workshop this month is on Thursday night. It would have been tomorrow night for anyone listening, but Manchester Finance Committee meets on Thursdays now, so it's been moved to Thursday night. And the rest of it we will talk about next week with budget discussions.
Thanks, Teresa. You're breaking up a tiny bit, but I think everybody could probably hear you. Okay.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. Does Eric or Kate have something to say about, I'm sorry about the squeaky door, about the policy committee meeting?
We don't have anything to
one
report
scheduled.
this week, yeah, but we're going to be meeting, I think, on the 18th to talk about the food service project.
Awesome. Okay, thank you. And Ken was going to talk about negotiations.
Yes, apologies, my video is a little bit iffy tonight and I can't see anybody else's. Hopefully mine's making it out. We had a meeting today with Mita. We're making proposals for how we go into, because we're relatively far into the budget season. And there were numbers, there was a 2.5% cost of living adjustment baked into the budget that we have presented publicly and are working towards for a final presentation at the end of the month. So we have begun conversations with Mita about that and are continuing the conversation. Expect, I think, our next meeting in early February. But appreciate everybody in the district, especially now with all that's going on with Omicron and all the testing. That appreciate everybody's work and support in your teachers, staff, administration. So against that backdrop, we continue to move forward with the budget and negotiations for next year. So it's my report, Sarah.
Thanks, Ken. All right, and then over to you, Pam.
Thank you. I'm not muted. That's good.
You
Let me
sound
just
good.
pull up a quick slide to help me along with my notes. Never really wants to cooperate when you're in the middle of something. Well, I'll start talking and hope that my notes can catch up with me. Obviously, I'm going to give you a brief update tonight on COVID. Coming off the vacation, or actually going into the vacation, we thought we had a very solid plan and anticipated a potential need for time for our nurses to process MedBot data as we came off the break, because we were starting to hear rumblings about Omicron before we left. I'm sure we're all well aware now that DESE did try to assist school districts over the vacation and came up with some late breaking news about midweek regarding masks and tests. And we were successful in getting both the masks and the tests on site and distributed to faculty. If you saw the follow-up news articles, there was some concern over the different types of masks and some of the tests that came out. So we haven't gotten any feedback that any of the rapid tests were expired. We did get the 2 different kinds of KN95 masks. We've made staff aware of the difference, shared that very good Boston.com or Boston Globe article with them, and made them aware that we can provide different masks for them. Some that we had purchased earlier in the year if they were in need of the KN95. But I think the key thing there to understand is that there has been no formal recommendation that the KN95 mask needs to be worn. It's really a personal choice. And I feel like the department was trying to do that to provide and respond to feedback they had gotten about what would make people feel safe. And it was very well intentioned, even though it may not have turned out as they hoped. So we are hearing that we may be getting more of the rapid tests in the future. So I'll keep everyone updated on that. I think I'll talk a little bit about testing again in a few minutes. So we had a plan to come back. The DESE stepped in and made the return back a little bit more eventful. But the reality is, despite a lot of what we're seeing in the news and a lot of our anticipation, we handled the surge return fairly well. We anticipated high numbers of absences. We did get them. I'll show you a quick chart in a second. But for the most part, we are continuing to be successful at stopping the spread in school. And I think that's my key message tonight is what we're learning about COVID as we go forward is we can't control everybody's behavior, certainly not when they're not in school. So all we can do is our best to manage the in-school environment and to make it as safe as possible to attend school. And that's where we keep coming back to the tried and true methods that are working are the masking and the distancing. And MedBot, while an imperfect tool, is at least allowing a first line of defense for nurses to screen who is popping up as symptomatic, and allowing them to have conversations with people before they come to school, which is allowing us to try to keep the inside of the buildings as COVID free as possible. I'm going to do a quick aside and then come back to my notes. I just cannot say enough about what the nurses have been able to do for us over the past couple of weeks. You probably have heard we're down a nurse. Unfortunately, one of our nurses is out on a leave. But Joanne Seaman and Nicole Grasso have just stepped to the plate, and they've been covering the entire district on MedBot. So we have some relief coming for them, but we are where we are today in terms of managing this through a total team effort of teachers, principals, directors, but those nurses are really our front line, and their efforts and their guidance in this has just been invaluable. So I can't say thank you enough to them. We had a nice conversation today. These poor people are working round the clock to manage people's inputs, taking calls on their personal lines at all hours of the day and night and over the weekends. So we're going to work on trying to make their workload more manageable while still maintaining a screening protocol for at least the remainder of January. So we're going to continue with MedBot. What we're going to do is the nurses have come up with some excellent recommendations on how to revise the questions to reduce the number of false flags. So right now, some of our questions aren't aligned to the current guidance. So you're going to see some new questions on that, which should cut down the number of unnecessary reds, right? So if you answer questions in a certain way, you're going to get a red notice to not do anything until you talk to the nurse. We're working with Ian, our data manager, and they're building in some logic patterns to it to identify people who are vaccinated versus unvaccinated, symptomatic versus asymptomatic, and try to really narrow the pool of people who are flagged and have to chat with the nurse before they come to school. So we're excited about that. We are going to reevaluate at the end of January, as I said, and we're setting nurses up with school-issued phones And you're going to see a communication coming out toward the end of the week, which establishes set calling hours and has some away messages built in directing people what to do if they need assistance over the weekend for a COVID issue. We're hoping that's going to cut down what appears to be 14-hour days for our nurses to, 8 to 10. They're not complaining, but we see it and we're aware of it, and we really want to help them make their lives a little bit more manageable. As I mentioned before, our keys to success: mask, distancing, cleaning, and ventilation. We're going to continue with the layer of mitigation for the foreseeable future. They did announce yesterday that the mask mandate is in play until after February break. So unless the committee feels differently, I see no reason not to align with the extended mask mandate and the new guidance that DESE has put out, and we can discuss that. I'll be done shortly. Questions that I've received since the surge: testing. Should we be reinstituting pool testing? Should we be giving out at-home PCR tests? That's the one where families would individually swipe and test tube up their results, drop them off at school. An outside company would process them and give them their results in 24 hours. Should we be sending rapid tests home with every student? I think in talking with the nurses, and talking with some people who are really concerned in trying to help, our ramp up for doing any level of testing isn't necessarily going to align with what we know from our past experience with participation in testing. So the reason we're not pursuing additional testing at this time is because we don't have a track record of community buy-in for it. If you remember when we did our pool testing last year, I think we started out with a high of 60% and then steadily declined to the point where it became really ineffective for us to continue. And those are lots of person hours on the nurses, which they just don't have to give at this point in time. So I think what makes sense for us in talking with the folks who are the front line on this is to continue with the process that we have, continue with test and stay, and continue with testing of symptomatic people. And I think that falls in line with what we've learned along the way, which is you don't really need to be testing unless you're presenting with symptoms or have been told directly that you are an official close contact. So we have confidence in our current system. Again, nothing's perfect, but we've been doing a decent job so far of managing the in-school spread. The other question that I received was, should we be mandating KN95 masks for all students? So should we look at our mask policy and up the ante? Again, I wouldn't recommend it at this point, because I don't know that there's an official mandate that this is the mask that people need to use. If the committee would like to explore that, we can certainly pull the policy group together and take a look at what the recommendations are. If this were the case, I feel we would have to convert the masks that we do, even though it's student responsibility to bring a mask to school, we do provide masks on a daily basis, so we would probably need to look at our ability to provide this level of masking, kind of at the entrances and the exits, as we typically do with the surgical masks. So that's the questions I've been receiving. I talked about the distributed tests. The other thing we have been doing, and I know Trish is going to talk a little bit about it because it's playing out mostly at the high school right now through athletics, is we have done some spot reorganization of large group events as needed. So what we're trying to avoid is everything's in person. That's our goal, continue as we are. But for instance, on Friday, we had planned an in-person all district coming together for a professional development session with Michael Eatman on cultural competence. It's something that really needs to be done in person, and we didn't really think it was wise to bring everybody together to risk more staff outages based from congregating people in one place. So we're going to reorganize that to post-COVID, look out to March, and bring him in and do that same program then. I know we're looking at our concerts and maybe limiting some access to the concerts or changing the venue to allow for appropriate spacing. And I know they've, at the athletic events, they've kind of kept it to no large crowds right now, parents only, and team members. And I'm going to let Trish speak to that when she presents, because she's been leading the charge along with Cammie on that. And I think it's a very well-reasoned decision, and probably if we're doing things right, hopefully it doesn't have to last very long. Very quick look at the numbers. down. So this is what our attendance looked like over the past few days. No secret that we had quite a few students out. But what this is just showing you is the number of COVID-related outages to the total number. So we have typical things that are causing kids to be out like in any other year, combining with folks who are either positive or close contact and quarantining. I think the reduced stay-at-home time under quarantine has been really helpful for us in getting kids back into school, getting teachers back into school if they come up on a quarantine list. And these are our positives for the first. I did get a question about this. We report, as a reminder, Wednesday to Wednesday. We have included January. And if you go to the website, you're going to see that there's a black bar that kind of divides the first semester and the second semester. And the first semester is chronological under that. So if you're looking for December, you just have to scan all the way to the bottom of the page. But these are our numbers for the shortened week last week and then again this week. Our numbers just for the last 2 weeks are a bit higher than they were in the first semester. So the good news is we're trending down. I'm going to be curious to see if it holds to the end of the week and then what we do after the long weekend. It's a big travel weekend for us. We have a lot of skiers in town, a lot of people heading out. So I'm hoping we don't see a small spike. From the reports I was getting from DESI meetings that I was attending, this was supposed to be the peak week. And then it was supposed to start to trail down. We'll see if that's the case. I think the Omicron numbers, if I was listening to the Times report this morning, have already doubled what the initial expectation was. So we'll see if those initial projections hold. So that's the state of COVID. I would say, as all in all, we've had a lot of outages. Principals have done a fantastic job managing the staff, keeping things moving forward. It's just that added layer of pressure that feels relentless right now. You feel like you're just about to come out of it, and then a new wave comes and it just kind of knocks you back down. But people are doing tremendous work to manage it, and I think we'll get through it. Happy to answer questions if you've been receiving them and they just haven't made their way to me.
You guys have any questions or thoughts for Pam? Teresa.
I always have questions. I have two questions. So the first is regarding the testing. It's actually not so much a question, but just an acknowledgement that sentiment about testing has certainly changed. I mean, since last year when we were doing pool testing, I'm not sure that it's something we need to pursue, but I can definitely tell you that among the people that I know and have heard from and everything, the sentiment about testing, generally speaking, has shifted for sure. And people are doing it much more frequently. So with that, go ahead.
Can I ask an ask back question? Are they looking? Are people looking for increased access to the rapid test, or are they looking for the pool testing, which is
not necessarily the pool testing? Just starting to ask questions because the access to the rapid testing is so much more sought out. And so my question with that is, and this has come up in conversation. The test and stay, which we barely make use of because we don't have many close contacts in school because of our mitigation efforts, that everyone's always wearing masks and everyone's always at least 3 feet away. I'm not suggesting that this is the case, but I'm asking, do we have tests available, for instance, for families that have a hard time either getting them or can't afford to just go get them and can't leave work to go stand in line for 4 hours and that sort of thing? Do we have anything in place to help those families?
If the child's symptomatic, yes.
Okay.
So test and stay close contact isn't highly used because we don't have a ton of close contacts, but they are doing a lot of symptomatic testing. So
that's helpful to know.
Yeah, if Johnny comes to school, like if we don't catch you through MedBot and say Johnny should stay home because he's got a fever over 100 and he's coughing and has the sniffles, and he comes to school and he has symptoms, he's getting tested.
Okay, that's news to me. So maybe that's not to the rest of the committee, but that's definitely news to me.
Can I piggyback on that question, Teresa? Does that mean Johnny can only get tested if he goes to school symptomatic. If his parents keep him home and they don't have an easy way to test.
Yes, you're right, Kate. We can't solve that problem. Like if we catch the student before, if he's flagged and he's told to stay home, then it's on the parent to get the child tested.
Yeah. Okay.
We don't have enough tests. Like if we could have handed out tests to everybody coming back. Well, first of all, I don't think we should have handed out tests to everybody because you only are supposed to test if you're showing symptoms or you've been identified as a close contact.
Yeah.
So the testing just because doesn't really help us. And that's what the nurses keep reinforcing. We do have a means if someone is coming to school. If you're having a conversation with the nurse and you're really in dire straits, my guess is if we can, we're going to assist in some way. But we don't have the capacity and we don't have the volume of tests to be the testing center.
Yes, understandable. Okay, thank you. And then
I don't know. I'll say I don't know what they're going to be doing. State just announced they got 26 million more rapid tests. I don't know if they're thinking about how they're thinking about deploying them, but I'll stay on top of it.
Yeah.
One of my guesses is we may see a more organized pre-vacation distribution for use maybe across the board with students and teachers who may have been identified, but I'm totally guessing. That's not really based on any fact. So don't hold me to that. But my guess with the feedback that came in from what happened over the holiday break, that would be maybe what they're thinking about.
Okay. And then the other question I have is regarding the masks, just starting in the news yesterday, seeing headlines that the CDC's, contemplating, suggesting that everybody go to the 95s. And so if that does happen to be the case, what's required of us to do we just wait till our next natural meeting? Does someone adjust on the fly to be aligned with CDC guidance?
If you guys wanted to make a motion, discuss it right now and make a motion that we should continue to align with CDC and Department of Ed guidance as it's revised, we can just continue to align to CDC and Department of Ed guidance.
But which one? Because they're not always the same.
Well, and my hesitation is that they're really, really difficult to source, especially in kid sizes right now. I've been looking for my own kids and it's impossible to order them almost from anywhere. So if the CDC were to change their guidance and we were expecting families to pivot on that guidance, we would need a good lead time for families to be able to do that.
We couldn't produce masks overnight either.
No, of course. Okay, so just something to watch then and be aware of.
I think we watch it. I think we also have to have some honest conversations about this, how much we can control going forward, because it's changing more rapidly. It's becoming increasingly polarized with people's opinions on what we should and shouldn't do. So I think we've been talking a lot internally about just focusing on what we can manage, which is when kids are in school. This is the domain we can control, and we can make decisions to keep school open and running and as safe as possible. But I think, when we get into the conversation about athletics, there's some real passionate opinion about either we shouldn't be offering it all and we should have closed down all extracurricular activities versus what's wrong with you people? People are going to TD Garden. So we're kind of still stuck in the middle of personal decision making, and we're kind of on a lose-lose. I think masks are right there. I think there will be recommendations, but I don't think we'll ever see, I'm guessing we won't see something definitive enough to execute a change.
Gotcha. And the way we've avoided, or what we've tried to do to deal with that so far, is stay as closely aligned as we can with what's allowable through DESE, what's allowed, what's suggested by CDC. So what we can really do is keep watching and discussing then, really.
I think if we have the opportunity to procure a bunch of N95 kid-sized masks, that we should jump on it. Just, if we're handing them out, let's hand out let's give people a choice. Maybe we could get branded N95 masks for all the children.
Well, last weekend I was at Hamilton Wenham and they had stacks of them just sitting on tables. They weren't the kid size, but I mean, that's what they have set out.
So they did, because they actually sent out communication to all of their families recommending
Yeah.
that that's what the kids wear.
Yeah. So, all right. Thank you for answering.
We've
these
learned in
questions.
this process is there are multiple versions of a KN95 mask.
Yep.
And that's if you didn't follow it, that became the concern with what the state sent out.
Yeah.
So I would say I have a bunch of the stocks sitting over here as backup. They're all the non-medical. We have some that went out as medical. So what are we really providing when we provide KN95? Are all the different manufacturers testing to the same efficiency rate? So I would be concerned a little bit because I don't know. I had put in a note to the staff. We're not mask experts and we cannot guarantee anything more than is printed on the manufacturer's package. But we'll keep an eye on it. And if we need to stock up, we will.
Thank you.
I just don't want to make guarantees if we can't produce the right product.
Of course. Thanks, Pam.
Pam, I have a question, sort of like ground level, what classrooms are looking like now for families who maybe haven't been in since the beginning of the year? Are what, especially at the elementary level, I know that at the beginning of the year they were going outside for snack time. Now it's cold out. Now we're seeing these numbers surging, and I've been hearing from people increasingly who are concerned about what it looks like in the classrooms, mostly because we just don't know.
They're getting mask breaks, but it's all indoors, as you said. So they're allowed to take the mask off when they're having a food break. I know for Essex, 3 feet is the common denominator. They're keeping all of the kids 3 feet apart. I'm happy to ask the elementary principals to come and talk about how they've adjusted, if they've adjusted anything in particular. I know we had been getting more comfortable within the 3 feet prior to the surge, but our collective agreement was we are tightening and reinforcing the original rules and kind of going back to a spring implementation. The 3 feet is the guideline. So that doesn't answer your kind of color commentary of like what's happening at the 3rd grade, what's happening at the 4th grade, but happy to ask them to come and report on that at the 25th meeting if it's something you guys like to hear about.
Always.
Or even just to communicate to families, directly. It would also
They're
be
like,
fine.
yeah, and if you want to send me a note, if it's worth talking about it now, like the specifics, kind of like what does snack break look like inside versus outside? Is that one of the questions?
Yeah, I think that would be a really good thing for families to hear right now as we are sort of readjusting, like what does that readjustment look like? I think that would be a great communication for everybody to hear. I know at the high school, we heard from Trisha that they changed the lunches back to the more socially distanced lunches that we had last year. And I was happy to hear that.
I think one of the big things is the elementary hasn't had the luxury of the high vaccination rate yet. So they didn't really pull back too much other than kindergarten was the big reorg, right? So originally they had the desks separate and it was having an impact on their ability to deliver instruction appropriately. So it kind of went back to some more clustered groupings and some more natural kindergarten settings. But I think we reverted back a little bit in some cases. So I don't want to speak out of turn. Let me go to the source and get that information for you.
Great, thank you.
While we're on the topic, should we throw out to Trisha just to answer any athletics questions that we might have?
Trisha, did the MIAA come out with rules or did we just make our own decisions about mitigation strategies or what's happening?
In terms of wearing masks while playing and things like that, the MIA has provided guidance there and we are following it. The issue that we've been talking about is spectators, and the KPN League decided to allow each school to make its own decision about the allowance of spectators in their gyms for basketball games, or at the Ys make their own decisions concerning swim meets, and the Reggie Center in Boston, where we run indoor track, has not allowed any spectators to attend meets. So when we were looking at coming back after break, our girls basketball team had been shut down for most of the holiday break due to a COVID outbreak there. And our boys basketball team was shut down Tuesday after break, and our hockey team, which is with Rockport, was shut down also last week due to players having COVID. So we made the decision that coming in for the first week or two, we were only going to allow family members be spectators so as not to have large groups of students in the fan section yelling. We know when that happens, masks fall, and we were really concerned about a spread within a school sanctioned function. You know, our goal is to keep our kids in school being educated, and then creating an atmosphere that is under our control that might increase the spread of COVID. Didn't seem like the best decision to us, but we did say we would monitor it weekly. So last week we did monitor it, and what we noticed throughout the week was a daily increase in COVID cases, and a rise in absenteeism to 85 students absent on Wednesday to about 100 students absent on Thursday. This week, we're starting to see a decline in those cases. We did not have any reports of new cases of COVID in high school today. And we have a number of students that are eligible to come back either the end of this week or the beginning of next week, which is really great news that we're seeing a so, you know, we are having a number of constituents looking to have us to have fan section coming up. Our goal was to make it to this week and maybe open a fan section on Thursday evening. I mean, on Friday night. That was originally, we began discussing this the Sunday before the start of break was our goal was to be able to have a fan section that night. It seems to me as though the numbers are moving in the direction that we can allow that we are seeing the decline. We're down to yesterday there were only 56 student absences, which is a huge improvement. And I will say our absences are, when we talk about COVID absences, it's not just students with COVID, it's students whose parents or their physicians have provided documentation that they should not be in school during this surge, and they're making the conscious decision to stay at home so as not to become sick themselves or bring illness home to other family members. So if we were to open up our fan section on Friday night, I guess one thing I would look to the committee for is just if there's any particular policy or structure that you would like us to have in place should we decide to do that.
You guys have any thoughts for Trisha?
Whatever.
I guess my question is like how I feel like we should be uniformly making decisions about large group gatherings. And so if we're canceling in-person professional development because we don't want a bunch of teachers in a room together, and these are presumably responsible adults who are going to keep their masks on and have, you know, are maybe more likely to behave responsibly than people at a Friday night athletic event. I guess I'm concerned about the message that we're sending by opening our athletic events to spectators and at the same time canceling in-person professional development.
I'm wondering because I went to I went to a lot of the football games. I haven't been to any indoor games, but I did go to the band concert right before break. And at the band concert, we were in the auditorium and we were sitting with separation between families. And I actually invited a friend to come sit next to me. I cheated. And that friend ended up testing positive for COVID the next day. And I had to go through the whole, stress of worrying about whether I was having COVID and having to go get a PCR test and everything. It's kind of a lot. So my question is, when we open it up to fans, are we expecting them to distance at all? Or is it just like a typical year when they would just kind of crowd into the stands together? Or are we telling them to try to stay 3 feet apart? Like, what's the expectation?
Well, our goal with the fan section would be to ask students, we'd probably put some X's on the seats for where they can sit to provide some distance. I will say controlling that in an atmosphere, if you have fan sections on both sides, like if another school travels well and our school is there traveling well, if you've ever been to a basketball game in our gym, it can be pretty it's fun. It's like it can be really fun. Let's leave it at that. But I think I have faith in our kids and that this is something that they want. And if they're not able to abide by the spacing that we create in the stands for them, and they're unable to continue to keep their masks up and not let them fall down if it's a 2-point game with 3 seconds left. If they're able to do that, then I feel as though it's a great experience for them. But if they're not able to do that, I would say we'd probably have to go back and then say no more sports.
Are you okay monitoring that and being the police?
That is a very good question. And given my family situation, no. But we do have others on the staff that are able to do that.
That also seems like a tricky gamble to make, in that once someone starts identifying risky behavior, it's already happened, it's already happening. So then what happens? Do we send spectators home in the middle of the game?
We could do that. We do have, we often have a police detail at those games as well, so they're there to assist us. I will say the only other piece of information I have anecdotally is from the other Cape Ann League schools who have allowed fan sections and they have not reported problems. But and Cami actually met with the ADs. She actually reached out to them today to find out if any were pulling back on their allowance of fans, if they had seen an increase in cases, and they are not pulling back on that.
Teresa's raising her hand. Go ahead, T.
So many questions that have come up through this. We've said we're looking to our health team for guidance, the nurses and the physician. Do we have a recommendation from our team? Have we had input from them on what to do about these things? What do they suggest?
I have not specifically spoken to the nurses. They've been so busy. I didn't really consider asking them about athletics, but that's certainly something I can do.
I feel like that kind of goes to the universal nature of this. If we have a health team to make these discussions and make a recommendation, I would feel much more comfortable rather than going on the whim of how I feel or how this feels about it, to let our actual health team make a recommendation.
Really good point. Thank you. Yeah.
Chris and then Ken.
Yeah, I just, Teresa, it seems like you guys are following all of, recommendations that would make sense in terms of keeping events as safe as possible. I don't think that it doesn't seem logical to me that we would see a large spike in cases because of a game where everyone, or at least, almost the entire majority of students are masked. If a mask drops down, I think most of what I've seen, it takes about 6 minutes of exposure to, maybe, for COVID to pass from one person to another, right? From what I know and just hear, there's a lot more exposure happening outside of school, right? And I do understand, the effort to keep school sanctioned events as safe as possible. And I just think that you're doing a great job doing that, so far. And I think our children have already lost out on so much over such a long time period that, to preemptively try to change something or shut something down based off of what might happen wouldn't make a whole lot of sense to me. Now, if it does, come out that, a week later we find out that, 35 students all tested positive because of a super spreader event at a high school game, then that's a very different story, right? Even if it's, a different community. But, also the numbers in general in our community are very low still compared to what they are nationally. So I'm not sure I would understand, changing anything at this point. And again, I do think you're doing a great job, and it's not easy. So.
Right, Ken and then Kate. Ken, you're muted. No, we still can't hear you. Kate, go ahead.
I was just going to piggyback off of Teresa's feedback that I think we could probably, I guess I don't know why we don't have guidance about just large gatherings in general, that whatever applies to other gatherings at school should apply to athletic events, in my opinion. So are we allowing all school assemblies? Are we having similar amounts of people in a similar space?
Well,
And
just before the break, we had the elementary school concerts, and I think that was okay, right? And they had a lot of people coming to watch the concerts.
well, we don't have concerts at Essex Elementary.
Yeah.
Reorganized the concert to split the school community in half to minimize the number of people in the gym at the time, and set all of the chairs at 3 feet apart. So I think, what I see in the differences is, and I think Chris is onto something, what the nurse, I'm not going to speak for the nurses, but if I've been listening closely, there's a lot going on in the hours that we aren't controlling, right? So what we're trying to do is minimize. I come to school, I sit in second grade, and now I've taken out the entire second grade class because we're not using good mitigation efforts inside. Our reasoning on the PD day and just moving the piece that brought us all together was we don't want to risk losing staff, because staff is what's going to cause a school closure. Also, the work that we're doing is best done in person, and we need our coach to be here in person to do it, and we need people to be focused and ready to receive to do the work. And right now, I think Sarah's made several observations. People are pretty overloaded and preoccupied and trying to manage in a pretty tough time. I said we managed well through the outages, but we've got people who are picking, like any extra minute of the day, people are picking up an extra duty or an extra something to do to make sure we're getting through. So the intensity of what we had planned for our coming together, combined with the mindset we need, concerns around spread, common meals, it just didn't seem like the best time to do that. We still are offering a full menu of morning PD activities here on site, so everyone's still going to be working. And the elementary schools are scheduled to work together at Memorial. So I don't know if I would look at that in the same light as I would look at the concert or the gym. At a concert, we can easily distance chairs and ask people to sit with household and apart. I think Chris is right. At some point, we have to move on from it. But in defense of, I think at the time, given the circumstances, given what we were getting from the state, given the real heightened awareness of the surge, not packing people body to body in the gym where they're kind of screaming and yelling made good sense at the time. I think you're going to find your natural path out of it. Our families are going to events in other schools. So what it may have served here in the moment is, I don't know if we're going to have lasting impact on it. If we're going to have a lasting benefit from creating the limitation. So this is kind of, in a weird way, working our way around to, we've got to get positioned to grow beyond the restrictions and the attempts at control, because the world isn't in that place anymore where it wants to be controlled. And we have a real split between the vaccinated and the unvaccinated into what people can and can't do and what the outcomes are for different individuals.
Teresa.
I agree that you're right, that there is such a split and that we are at a point where people don't want to be controlled. I guess that's why I would really advocate for some universality across district about these kinds of things. So for instance, if we are going to have, fan sections at a basketball game, I don't want to feel like my daughter's middle school concert is on the chopping block 20th. I just feel like if we're going to make a decision about this, preferably with the support of our health team, I don't care what way it is. I just think that there ought to be a universality of this, some consistency across the district such that, elementary school is going to have a concert and they're safe with it. The other elementary school can be safe with it as well. We're going to have sports things. We're going to have our after school concerts. We're going to have all of these things. That's fine. But let's be clear across schools.
So I would recommend we follow the statewide capacity limits, which there are none.
Well, I agree with Teresa. I think we should be consistent with that. And I also think there's a big difference between mandatory meetings, or where something that's mandatory versus something like a basketball game, which is optional.
So
To that end,
sorry, go ahead, Ken.
no, I'm sorry. I'm glad my microphone's working now. To that end, I just wanted to point out there's an obligation. We have an obligation to provide education. I know that having family and friends as part of the game, whether you're the traveling team going somewhere else or having people coming in, is part of the experience of being an athlete. But the only thing I would mention is there's a line to be drawn around this. This isn't entertainment, and we're not obligated to provide entertainment. So we definitely should be doing whatever it is with, whether it's just making sure that it's very, very clear. The expectations are communicated around. You will be safe. There will be mask wearing, or game stops, or whatever it is that people must maintain spacing and all the rest. Even with the best of intentions, and I hear Sarah's story, this is a community thing, and we're doing this for the kids. So let's not introduce unnecessary risk if we don't have to.
Okay, so we gave Trisha a lot to think about with the basketball games, and I'm sure she's gonna keep thinking about all that. Pam, do you have one more thing to say?
I do, and it's just for your consideration, and just I think the why we're trying to control sometimes gets lost. So I would be on board with going with no capacity limits, maintaining masking and 3-foot distancing. And if we have an outbreak at a basketball game or a concert, I just don't want us to then be on the hook for managing that outcome, which is now we need to try to give remote because we've got half of a class that's out. We can't do both things. We can't let it go and then also create a backstop for letting it go. So if Trisha's trying to make sure she doesn't escalate beyond 100 kids out by limiting at the basketball game, sounds irrational to some, but she's also thinking about what's the implication if I bump up to 250 kids out of my building? How do we deliver education that way? And what's the demand going to be back on the school if that's the case? So that's where I'm very comfortable in saying maybe we just need to go with the flow and move into more relaxed guidance, but also understand that if individuals are making personal decisions, the consequences of those decisions are also the person's responsibility.
All right, so as I was saying, we've given Trisha a lot to think about. We don't have anything to vote on. We certainly can't vote on this. It wasn't on the agenda. It's not a votable issue at this point. We've given a lot of food for thought and a lot of feedback. Pam, if you guys are meeting with the health team, I think asking them if they have any advice for large group gatherings in general, whether they're mandatory or for fun, that would be really good for us to hear. I do think it's nice that the kids are getting to be kids, and I think having been to those football games in the fall, it was really good to have some normalcy. And so I'm sure that there's a little cost benefit analysis there. But anyway, I think we do need to move on because it's, time is ticking and we have a lot of things to talk about tonight. So Pam, are you done? And can we transition into Trisha's program of studies?
Yep,
All right,
go for
Trisha,
it.
you are on. Thank you.
I'm not sure how you want me to go through this, because I know there's a lot of new committee members here that haven't gone through the program of studies in prior years. What I've provided you with is the complete program of studies for the 2022-2023 school year. And then I provided you with just a summary of items that were changed or updated in the program of studies. So I can go through all those for you if you'd like, or if you'd just like to ask me questions about the program of studies, that would be fine as well. I'll take my lead from this committee.
I'm pretty familiar with the program of studies, having had 2 kids go through the high school, but I think like a quick overview would be really helpful. And then if you could just tell us about the changes, that would be awesome.
Sure. So our program of studies at the high school is set up to kind of provide guidance for students and families about what the 4-year experience will look like at the high school, to provide them guidance and planning for those 4 years, and also to give some guidance in terms of when you're thinking about your post-secondary outcomes, what are the things that should be most important to you. It provides the graduation requirements in terms of courses required, credits required, and things like SCORE and community service. So as you go through, it begins with the arts, it goes in alphabetical order, with the exception of world language, which I should have moved to the end because world language used to be foreign language, but now we've updated that language to world language. That was weirdly said, but anyways. These are the courses that are offered within the program of studies. You'll see this course is
We
not
can't see,
offered.
we can't see your slides aren't up.
Oh, I didn't bring slides. Do you want me
Oh,
to?
no, that's fine.
You guys got
So
all the-
I'm just, if, I know there are a few people watching, and so we're just also looking at the agenda, but if anybody,
I'm working on getting that memo up.
okay,
for
if,
everybody to
yeah,
look
and
at.
Sorry,
it's
I appreciate
available, the
that.
high
Would've
school
done that.
program of studies is online at the MERHS website, and you just click on the program of studies, and you can get the whole thing, and it's really long, so,
Very
but we all got it on school committee, so.
My apologies. Thank you.
No,
Yeah.
that's okay.
I forgot in person, I don't have to work.
No worries.
So yes, we did make some changes this year to the program of studies. We included the new MERSD mission, vision, and core values, replacing the old document that was there. You'll see under visual arts, we've made some changes to our courses. We're no longer offering video and graphic design because the teacher has determined that content can be moved into the digital photo curriculum. And when we're scheduling the high school, the more sections we can have of something like digital photo, the better the schedule actually builds and runs. We've updated some course names to match the College Board, and we have added a new course in the visual arts, and that's AP Art History, which is something kids have been asking for, and we're pleased to be able to offer. Not many updates in English, with the exception of a change in one of the senior electives. So for people who are not familiar with the course of studies, senior year, seniors take 3 1/4 electives, so they can change teachers throughout the year based on their interest. And we just changed British literature to include a more description of the actual literature that they will be reading in that course. Again, foreign language has changed to world language in accordance with state standards. Mathematics, we've offered this course called Quantitative Reasoning Honors. We have it CP and Honors. In Honors, we never get enough kids to run that class. So we've decided to, or the math department has decided to offer an Honors Statistics class in its place. This class can be a senior year math required course, or it could be an additional second math for students in grades 10 and 11. Computer science, Mr. Cogger, who's our STEM teacher, is continually updating his program, and he's decided that we really don't need to have interactive device design. It was always undersubscribed. So he's including Python as an advanced technology elective. And he's updated the course descriptions to match what he's currently doing based on the addition of 3D printers and a laser cutter that were both sponsored by Spalding Foundation. And then in social studies, we've added a course, Diverse American Stories, as an elective. And then we alternate 9/11 and the War on Terror with Facing History and Ourselves each year. So those are flip-flopping. And we've updated the descriptions for World History 2, sorry, that's a typo, and American History 1 to meet the new state standards that have recently come out, and to provide a more global lens of history than Eurocentric. I like to keep it brief.
So is that's it, right?
That's it.
That was
yeah.
good.
There's a lot there, but those were the changes. Nothing really huge except the addition of AP Art History and honor statistics.
Does anybody have questions for Trisha? I know it's kind of a lot if you haven't looked at the high school course of studies before.
Trisha, I just have a question about the changes to the social studies curriculum, just because we've gotten some questions on school committee from members of the public who aren't as familiar with how that curriculum gets updated and adapted. Could you just speak to that really quickly?
So yeah, there was a shift in the social studies frameworks that put an emphasis on civics in grade 8. So in grade 8, we used to teach World 1, and then in 9th grade you take World 2. We've shifted our content between the 7th grade and 9th grade to be able to cover World 1 and World 2 and offer civics in grade 8. And we also have a civics project that's required by the Commonwealth that we've implemented in grade 11.
And then the new social studies frameworks, just to clarify, are not ours. They're from the
Right,
states.
they're the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. And actually, the Commonwealth is actually looking to pilot an MCAS test in the social studies this spring at some select schools. They're looking to implement that in coming years. They've attempted to do that in past years and have been unsuccessful, but we'll see if that's something that is implemented at this time. I'm a social studies person, so I kind of, you've been around for over 20 years. You're kind of like, okay.
Thank you.
I'm glad we're expanding the art to the art history class. I think that's excellent.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a great class. I really think kids will, particularly even kids that are not artists, but are interested in history and the development of art, will really appreciate the course.
Yeah, I think that's great. And you got any other questions for Trisha? If not, we need to officially approve the course of study, I believe. Okay, would somebody like to make a motion to approve the high school program of studies?
So moved, Whitman.
Thanks, Teresa. A second?
Second, Kate.
Thank you. And I'll go down the roll call. Eric?
Yes.
Kate?
Yep.
Chris? Teresa?
Yes.
Ken? Ken's trying to say yes, but his computer's not working. Okay, good. And I'm
My
also
phone
a
is
yes.
dying.
Okay, thank you, everybody. And thank you, Trisha. And thank you for all of your hard work.
Thank you, everybody, for the approval of the course of studies and your feedback on spectators. It's very much appreciated.
Okay,
Okay,
when you
have
ask
a
for
good
feedback,
night.
you get it from us.
Love it.
All right, now we get to talk about the budget.
So we thought we would start by recapping where we are. So we haven't talked or met since the 12:15 meeting. So Avi, do you have those budget slides handy to put up, or do you need me to? I can do it too. I'm going to grab our slides from last meeting and just put them up for review. And I'm going to ask Avi to just recap the top level highlights of the budget, kind of where we are, what those key drivers are. And then what we had talked about was spending a little time tonight understanding one of our key drivers, which is special education out of district costs, how our in-school, in-district programming helps to minimize our out-of-district costs, but what the cost benefit is of them themselves. And Allison's here to talk about that for us tonight and to answer questions. So Avi, if you can recap the budget essentials, then we'll move into Allison giving us a little bit more background on our programming, and then we can just have a general discussion about what we heard in our hearing and what our next steps are, and we'll share how we see the budget, the gap closing pathway mapping out going forward. All right, so I need to share my screen, right?
Yeah, or I can hold up if you want me to.
I
But
have it handy if you'd like me to do it.
be great. Thank you. From 12:15, I think had a couple, one or two extra things in there, if that's the one you have. But in the meantime, I'll get started and try to make it brief because I think most of the folks on this call have heard this material already. So we just want to hit the key points. And first, in our annual effort to try to start with a level services budget where we are keeping the same level of program in place, which can include some cost increases for things that just naturally increase either for contractual obligations or just because of the fact that there are rising costs in certain areas that might be mandated spending. We have a gap of about $648,000. So that's the first thing to know, but that's based on the fact that we're trying to end the budget with a target level of assessment to the towns, assessment being the cost to the taxpayers. And so that the target assessment growth that we have in this budget is 3.5%, which is consistent with some of the areas where we've been in prior years. Some years a little lower, some years a little bit higher, but that's kind of in the general range of what we're trying to shoot for. We do have a $335,000 revenue gap in addition from the prior year, which we plugged by using rainy day funds. So that's going to carry forward. The major drivers of the budget are mandated costs in a couple areas. One being special education out of district costs, which is about $405,000 between tuition and transportation. As Pam mentioned, we'll talk a little bit more about that with Allison's portion of the presentation. We also do have a portion of the growth in mandated costs related to some of the additional teaching assistant positions that we've put into the budget. We talked about that, and that absent those costs, the personnel growth, which is right around 4%, would be closer to about 3.2%. So you can see right there, 3.2 would be very much on the low end of our steady state spending for level services, but how just trying to make sure we're taking care of some of the mandated needs of keeping kids in district, sometimes which we can do with teaching assistants. Allison will talk about that, how that can bump 3.2% on the personnel side up to just around 4%. And the other area being health insurance. And we continue to see that health insurance, particularly on the retiree side, which has now grown to have more people insured who are retirees than active employees, also due to mandated requirements, is another area of budget pressure, because we not only have the annual growth, which we're currently budgeting across the board for retirees and actives 10% rate increase, but we also have additional heads each year as active people move into the retiree pool. So those are, I think, are some of the biggest areas in terms of the major drivers. And maybe we can advance the slide. Trying to see how I can get my side by side. Is that it? You guys all see the budget slides? There we go.
You can see the budget drivers.
All right, so here are the major areas of where the money goes. Compensation being typically around 2/3 of our costs. As I mentioned, about 4% growth, including a 2.5% assumed cost of living adjustment, which district-wide, that's consistent with where we've been for the past 3 years. So that's kind of a plain vanilla assumption in there. And I talked about how the growth would be 3.2% excluding the 101 aids. And I think I've hit on most of these points on insurance and pension. You can see when you add heads for new retirees, in addition to the 10% rate growth, that's how you get to 14% growth or $152,000 of budgetary adds. So, and then I think the last piece that we talked about as well, out of district tuition, you can see about almost 30% growth to the budget, well above the level that we typically, that 3.5 target level, for the reasons we've talked about. We're still seeing a lot of savings from our in-district programs, but, and we are seeing some increased reimbursements that we're expecting from the circuit breaker state aid program, which acknowledges high cost tuitions, but this is an area that's certainly impacting the budget.
Was this a good segue to get into unpacking this a little bit?
Yeah, I think the rest of the slides, I think, get into more higher level things. So yes, let's.
Allison, do you want to drive your own slides or do you want me to put them up? Sure. So the thinking was, because we have spent a lot of time in the past kind of helping you understand the structure of what creates our healthcare costs. And our healthcare costs combined with our salary costs are the overwhelming majority of the budget. We thought we'd unpack the special ed costs for you a little bit, assuming you may not have as much knowledge about those as you do the other two pieces. So I think I have the right set of slides. Those are not the right set of slides. One quick second.
What's going on now?
Oh, here they are. I got them. And let's get to my sharing function. Okay, are they showing?
Yes, I'm good now. Sorry, I also just said something without being muted as I was trying to send a family member away, right when they tried to walk in just in time for my presentation. Sorry about that. So in special education, we are required to provide a continuum of programs and services, and those services can range from session of speech and language or reading tutorial, or inclusion support, all the way to specialized in-district programs, which we have a number of, and I'll talk more about those in a minute, and all the way to out-of-district programs. So we're on a continuum of less to more restrictive programming for students, as depending on the intensity of their needs, essentially. And this slide shows you how many students. We have about 230 students in special ed at this time. And you can see the breakdown in terms of most of our students are in inclusion or tutorials. We have 61 students in specialized in district programs and currently 22 students who are out of district in a variety of types of programs. You can change the slide, Pam. Thanks. So for this presentation, Pam and Avi had asked me to look at the specialized programs that we have in districts. So the middle of that continuum that I just showed you, students whose needs we can meet in district,
but who have more intensive needs than, for example, the tutorial or the inclusion setting. So we have a number of programs, and I did an analysis of what do those programs cost us versus what it would cost for those same students to be placed out of district. So in doing that calculation, I just thought I would break it down for you. So basically, when we're looking at the cost of in-district specialized programs, our cost drivers are number one, staff salaries. Also, we look at the benefits we're paying them. And then we do have some tuition students in district. We currently have 3 students in district who are tuitioned in from other districts. And so we subtract that revenue from the cost of salaries and benefits because it does help to defray the cost of programming. So we take that figure and then calculate the out-of-district program figure, which is a combination of tuition, transportation, and then we subtract circuit breaker funding from that amount. So that gives us the out-of-district net cost. We then subtract the in-district net cost, and that gives us the savings from in-district programs. And if you change the slide, I will show what the programs are and what we are saving. Okay, so I'll describe each of these programs as I go through this table. The Swing program is a program for students with intensive needs. Some of the students have developmental disabilities. They tend to have below grade level skills, challenges with memory, and often language as well. And we have programs for students in grades K through 12. And we have 14 students, K through 12, in the Swing programs, or the continuum of Swing programs. And our current savings, when we look at what do those programs cost us versus what would it cost to send those students out of district minus circuit breaker, our savings is $284,000 and $284,186 a year. We also have a program called SAIL. It's called SAIL pre-K, from K through grade 8. The program changes to transitions at the high school. Similar programming, but the high school is more focused on supporting students who are at risk of having difficulty with their transition to post-secondary, whether it be work, whether it be college. These are students who need extra support around preparing for that transition. And so we have 22 students serviced by those programs, and our savings is 909, 100,000 and 872. And then we have the Earl Program, which is a program for students with dyslexia, that it is comparable in many ways to Landmark, except that I believe that our program is stronger than Landmark, but it's that kind of a profile of student. And Earl is a self-contained program for the most part. We have sub-separate language-based instruction for students. We offer the program starting in grade 2, and I wrote 8+ here because we do offer supports for Earl students at the high school. Some years we have students who need supports at the high school, those type of language-based supports, but for the most part, the students who are in Earl do exit in grade 8 or before grade 8 and are able to go to the high school and be very successful in an inclusion setting. And very often they not only exit Earl, but they exit special ed. So that is why we tend not to have a lot of programming at the high school, but we can and we do when students need it. So that fluctuates. So primarily students in grades 2 through 8. We have 22 students in the program currently, and the savings is here, 530 to 71. And lastly, we implemented a new program this year called ACE. It's the Academic Communication Enhancement Program. It's for students who present with lower memory and language skills, and who need separate instruction. And right now the program is just in grades 4, 5. We have 3 students in the program, and even with just 3 students in the program, we are saving $33,000 a year, approximately. And you can see from the savings that we have that the larger the program, typically the more that we're saving, which makes sense. And the sales/transitions program has a lot of wraparound services, so those are a little bit less costly than a program like Earl that offers self-contained instruction. So that's the reason for some of the difference in savings. Another factor is just that placements cost different amounts depending on what your needs are. So that's another factor that comes into the cost analysis. And that is, do I have another slide? Yes. Okay. I have one more slide. So also, so that's the cost analysis of what we're saving through these programs. And then also, I wanted you to have a sense in looking at the special education out of district budget, and we are having an increase for next year. And I do want to talk about that a little bit more because Avi touched on it, but I'm sure people have questions about that. But when we look at our projections for next year, I thought it would be helpful to look in terms of the type of need students have when they are placed out of district. And so you can see that students who have a complex learning disability profile, or they have higher functioning autism spectrum disorders, you can see that it's very unlikely that they will need to be placed out of district. We only have 3 students placed out of district, and the projected tuition cost for them for next year is $60,000. So that is not what's driving our out of district budget at all. What is driving the budget is students with very high levels of mental health and behavioral health needs, typically students who have safety issues around those needs. We are projecting 10 students for next year. This is always subject to change as the year goes on, with a projected tuition cost here of $841,820. And the severe special needs students, we're projecting that 12 will be out of district next year, and that's a total of $1.1 million for those students. They tend to have more expensive placements. They tend to have sometimes more expensive transportation in that cohort. And something that's interesting to note about the severe special needs placements is we do have swing and we do have programming for students with more intensive needs, but we are required to meet, if a student is not able to earn a high school diploma, we are required to provide educational programming for them until they turn 22. So I believe 25% of that severe special needs cohort is in that 18 to 22 population. So what we're starting to see and what is impacting our out of district budget is we have students with severe special needs who are turning 18, and that's only happened fairly recently. When I came to the district, we didn't have much programming for students with that level of need. And we started to create programs, and we're just starting to see those students complete grade 12, and we have an obligation to them. It's nice that they've been able to be in district and have high quality programming all the way through grade 12, but we do have that obligation. And so that is a factor in our out of district budget as well. The other factor in our increased out of district budget include, in addition to the what we call the postgraduate students, the 18 to 22, is just because we are a small district, We do not have a large number of students out of district, especially relative to other districts. We can sometimes have a bubble of students who are not either graduating that year or aging out that year, and it does look that way for the next 2 years, that those years we just don't have a lot of students exiting. After that, we do start to see some students moving on, and that will have a positive impact on our out-of-district budget. That's my piece. Does anyone have questions? Ken?
Maybe not in a question, Allison, but thank you. I know this is, I appreciate in my 5, almost 6 years on the school committee, the presentation, the information that you provide around this, and more importantly, the services and the students that you and your team manage and provide education for. It's a challenge, and you do an excellent job with it. It was more just an observation than questions around this. I think it's important that we share this, and so people are aware. It's not an area that we have much control over, but it's an area that we definitely have an obligation to handle. So thank you.
Well, you're very welcome. And it's an area that I'm passionate about. Well, obviously as a director of student services, but particularly these specialized programs, we have been able to create very, very high quality specialized programs that students are making a lot of progress. They're staying in their home community, and we're saving money. It's a great combination. It's just a win-win for everyone involved. We have parents who really want their children to be here, and we're able to provide for them. So it's exciting that we're able to do that and also contain costs. So it's something that I'm very excited about, and I'm just pleased to see the results. We also, we don't have room to take a lot of tuition students. We don't take a lot of tuition students, but it's also just been gratifying that our reputation is very strong. We do get 10 to 12 referrals from other school districts every year because of the quality of our programs. And we end up saying no to many of them because we have to have room. We don't want to take a space from a resident. The student has to be a perfect fit so that it has a positive impact on the other students and the student who's coming in. So those circumstances are rare, but it's nice to know that our reputation has actually caused us to get referrals from other districts as well.
Well, that's actually a very interesting point that I think is worth mentioning, especially for the newer members of the school committee. Is over the years, it's been your passion is obvious in how you do this, but also more importantly, just completely objectively from a third party point of view. I've seen the collaborations that you've worked on with Landmark and other schools that have come to see kind of how we do that. So I think that speaks volumes just objectively on what you've been able to put together. And your comments also prompted me a question, I guess. Do you mind just speaking a little bit to the new memorial school, the pre-K, a little bit about that program and how that's worked, or any hopes or expectations you have? I know that's more of a physical space change, but does it affect the programming or the capacity or what you are able to do at the pre-K level?
Yeah, so I have a couple things going on at the preschool level. And are you referring to the expansion to the second classroom?
Correct.
That's
just
what
even
you're referring.
That as well as just even the new facility at Memorial.
Oh, yeah. Well, our enrollment has just exploded this year. So we're actually at the point where we can't take any more students, but I mean, it is January and we were able to take some students even after the school year started, which was nice, but we have just exceeded expectations as far as being able to not only meet the needs of children with disabilities who are in the program, but also to take many, many more peer pals. We were struggling with having enough peer pals for the students with disability, to work with the students with disabilities. You're not supposed to have more than 50% students with disabilities, and we were having trouble with that prior to the expansion. But now with the new school, with the option to do a full day program, we have 10 or 11 peer pals in each cohort, which is even more than we projected. And and we hired another teacher. It's been very, very successful. And actually, it was not anticipated, but I have a couple preschoolers with severe special needs who needed programming this year and have complex needs. And we were even able to offer some programming for them. So we really have been doing great things and attracting a lot of children into our preschool program this year.
Thank you. That's awesome to hear. I know I've got an elementary schooler, and he has appreciated that he was a peer pal for a year, and it's great to see how just the change and how much mainstream and how we're really able to include everybody in the classrooms and just keep things going well together. That's great to hear. And never mind the whole, you're forging ahead to areas where there's talk of universal pre-K or just making kinder or pre-K more available in our district. And so I'm glad to hear the success of the program. That just helps on so many levels.
It's been great. It has exceeded our expectations for sure. Any other questions? Sarah? Oh, I think you're muted.
Sorry, I have a question, and it's not really the budget. So I apologize to Avi because I know this is really the budget, but since you're here, I know all of our teachers in the district have been working really hard and have really put in such a huge effort, especially our special education teachers, many of whom have been back since the beginning of September last year when most of us were still remote. So my question is, how are our special ed teachers doing? Are they hanging in there? How's it going?
Everyone's experiencing stress this year, but I have to say that the special education teachers they've been so incredibly flexible, and they have adapted to whatever they've needed to do. They're just a great group of people who are just focused on ensuring that the students have a great experience. So I would say in some respects, I feel like, and maybe it's even because there are a lot of special ed teachers who were just in person from the beginning. I think they've adapted extremely well to the challenges and have been very, very positive with everything that we've been through, and very, very excited to work with kids in person, an increasing number of students in person. So they're doing incredibly well. I would say better than I would even expect of them. They've really just been very dedicated, and they're a very dedicated group of people.
Yeah, that is great. Okay, thank you so much, Allison. Does anybody else have any questions? I know we have more budget to talk about beyond. So, all right. Thank you, Allison. This is great. Really helpful.
Thank you.
That gives you a little bit deeper understanding of that chunk of the budget we're discussing as a responsibility to fund this year. Let me bring the other slide deck. Well, actually, let me do this. Avi, are there other points you feel we should review with the committee or a committee? Are there points that you want to be refreshed on before we talk a little bit about where we are and where we need to go? Are there
I'm
questions?
happy to take any questions, but I do think there are one or two things in the slides that are just worth revisiting very quickly, which just relate to the issue of reserve usage. And so I just want to touch on that very briefly. And so yeah, I think that would have been slide. Yes, this would be slide 12 and 13. And I think just really what we want to get to on this area of the topic is just that as we are talking about the fact that some of the one-time funds that we may have available in our reserves, rainy day funds, as a potential way to plug some of our gap, we do have simultaneous needs that are significant and important on the facility side and capital spending. You know, we've really moved over the years to not only have really good preventative maintenance, which has helped us to save a lot of money by not letting things get to the point where it's more expensive to remediate. And we got a couple incentive points from MSBA for doing a good job with our PM program, but also starting to really articulate what our multi-year costs are for some of the facility capital improvements. And Pam, did you want to touch on some of these comparables before we?
Do you want the
This
comparables
this
or did
is-
you want the reserves?
This is the new slides 12. I'm sorry. So it's the one maybe right after this. I apologize.
That's my bad. I'm sorry. I landed on
okay.
12.
I told you 12. So my deck is the old 12. So thank you. Anyway, this is just a quick look at where we are with some of our reserve fundings. And I know we've talked about this before, but we already have approved uses, you know, for between the Essex Elementary playground that's we're just about finished paying up for, as well as the other 220 there, I think related to some of the technology improvements that we did this during the current fiscal year. So if you just scroll down slightly, you can see there it is. Yep, the technology equalization program that we put in place. So really, of the 550,000 that's already been approved, that's really primarily going towards the Essex side of the program to make sure that we're continuing to keep the program up to date. And we know that's our last remaining old facility. And I know we've talked a little bit about the timing of that project, but you know, clearly that's a building and a program that needs continued investment to make sure that we're, you know, being thoughtful about alignment across the district. So moving to the next slide are just a couple of the things that are on the target list that we've been talking about. And we've made a lot of progress. If you look at the bottom portion, those are things that we have already achieved, some of which, like the heating controls, have happened through a partnership with the town of Essex for the Green Grant Program. But on the top half, there are really some items here that, you know, this is a use of reserves that we have to, I believe, expect it needs to happen. These are really important needs, some of which are more pressing than others. And just to highlight a few, we know because we've been talking about the group that's working on turf field replacement, certainly the Highland Field turf, that's one that we're targeting for the summer. I believe a backup boiler for Essex Elementary should be done this summer as well, as an example. And so those two items alone, you know, that's about, you know, getting close to $750,000. So it's important for us to just keep in mind that while reserves can help us with our budget gaps, they're really designed for one-time uses. And this is that list. And I think there's a lot of things on this list that are important. As you know, we have just been putting the finishing touches on an RFP that we're putting out for a kind of Habib report too, which we're expecting to go out in the next couple of weeks so that we can get an updated sense of what the costs are for taking care of Essex Elementary over the next several years, as well as the middle school, high school. So I just want to make sure that we're focused on this, because the next phase of our conversation on budget is really what do we do with this $648,000 gap, which, if you include prior year reserve usage, is closer to $1 million.
Say, any questions on reserves before we talk about how we're going to address the gap and what the committee should consider before making final approval?
Oh, I think with that said, if there are no comments, I mean, really what our work is to do between now and when the budget gets adopted on February 1st is to figure out what, if any, changes we want to make to the budget. I think knowing that we have a budget gap and knowing that we want to stick to the 3.5% assessment increase, which is the number to both towns. We can talk about apportionment separately, and I'm happy to do that. I think we do need to look at what might we do on either the revenue or the spending side. And, I think we've talked in the past couple of years that we've gotten to a point with a lot of the reductions that we've made over prior years where there isn't really a lot of opportunity to do spending reductions unless we want to start cutting into the program. So that's always an option. We've tried to avoid that for good reason. Make sure we keep our program strong, in which case, the revenue needs to grow in some capacity. Now with reserve funding, we can do that on a temporary basis for a period of time. But those are funds that would eventually become depleted. They're not a recurring source of funds. So we have some options that we can use. They're kind of short-term in nature, and we can talk about them here. But here are some of the areas that we know where we're, in talking with Pam, where it might start to make sense to look at how we might conceive about dealing with the gap that we have.
I think
I
was just going to say, I think we kind of sketched this out verbally last time we met, but this would be assuming that the committee's position on not reducing program stands and that we all agreed to use reserve funds as a bridge to a future revenue connection. This would be how we would propose addressing this year's gap. So we have retiree healthcare costs. We have a group that we discussed, the pre-Medicare legacy plan folks. So these are folks that we cannot move onto the Medicare plan. We are proposing using $150,000 of our OPEB funding to offset this increase to the budget this year. We're looking at the out-of-district numbers and PG as postgraduate, funding part of the postgraduate out-of-district tuition. So you heard Allison talk about students who have graduated out of our in-district programs, but not formally graduated from high school, that we are now responsible for through age 22. We are saying commit $150,000 of reserves to their tuition and transportation costs, knowing that at the end of this year, we'll have exiting students in the class of end of next year, the class of 23, which will allow us to put $150,000 back into reserves to fund it for a second year in a row. So using reserves to address the new expanded cost of out-of-district tuition for postgraduates. And we're going to propose a strategy we used a few years back, which is not accounting for out-of-district students until they become a real cost. So if we reduce our gap by $344,000, which carries anticipated cost of potential outplacements, and agree that we're going to earmark that amount of money in our reserves to be used should these materialize throughout the year, we'll then make adjustments in the FY24 budget to address those needs, either replenishing reserves with circuit breaker or finding commensurate cuts and perhaps other students exiting the program. So basically we're establishing a reserve fund. So we're not really spending the money until we need to for students who may go out mid-year. So that effectively would spend $300,000 in reserves up front and put another $340,000 in an earmarked segment of our budget in case needed to address out-of-district placements going forward in the year. I think you know, reserve use is reserve use, and Avi and I discussed this at great length. But I think what we are trying to illustrate here is what's causing the expansion of our budget at the present time is new added costs. It's the added cost for retiree health that we do not have a tool to manage, and it's just the expanded financial obligation of ensuring these students are provided the services they need through age 22. And this is a planning ahead, but not really, it's not real expenditure yet. So I don't think we should withdraw dollars until it's necessary to do so. Avi, thoughts or comments you'd like to share on this?
Keep it very brief. First, on retiree healthcare, the OPEB trust fund that we've set up, which I think has about $4 million identified to go into it, it is set up expressly for this purpose. So in that sense, while it is a reserve fund, it's really made to be used in this way. An actuary might tell you to wait until you've fully amortized a balance sheet liability, and I'm not going to argue with that. However, I think the size, we've talked about doing this in prior years to close budget gaps where it's expressly designed for this case. I think it's something that makes a lot of sense because it doesn't, the magnitude of it is not such that we are, in any danger of significantly depleting that fund. Is for this purpose, and we are not talking about reducing the actual budgetary allotment for OPEB contribution. We would still have that, which is, I'm looking at my notes here, about $620,000 per formula based on our negotiated agreement with the Teachers Association. So that one to me, I think makes a lot of sense in situations like this when you do have a revenue shortfall. Yes, in a perfect world, we would have additional revenue and we would just continue to build that, get the return on assets that we're getting by having those funds invested with the Mass Teachers Retirement Pension System. But I think that one is something that makes sense. For, the other areas, that's where we're just trying to look at costs that may be incurred over a couple of years, but then might change. And I think that's where, I feel like it might make sense for this current year, but we do really need to start thinking between the bottom two items here, as well as all the items on the facility capital needs. We really need to start thinking about our multi-year game plan for revenue correction.
Yeah, so I think no matter how you look at it, we are outlaying more than we're taking in revenue, and we're striking a balance and building a bridge to a correction for that using reserves. But we are, if we collectively looking at our reserves, $600,000 to $900,000 in deficit. So I don't want to bury that. I don't want us to overlook it. I think we also have to determine how we're going to function in the moment. And as Avi said, talk about the plan for the future. So we don't think that, we're not recommending reserves because it's the best fiscal policy going forward, but it is our best potential solution for the short term as we work toward a longer term realignment. So just things I'd like the committee to keep in mind when they think about reserve use. It's concerning. It's not the best way forward, but it will solve our current year issue. Once we start using them, we go back to that initial $100,000, we have continued dependence on them until there's a correction. So until we can replace that revenue stream, we're going to be using reserves to close gaps in our budget. Avi mentioned we have critical capital projects that can't be, for health and safety reasons, put off much longer, if any longer, and those impact both Essex and the middle high school. And there was a very deliberate plan to set aside reserves for capital projects. So this has been a planned expense for many years. We feel the need to go forward with those. And looking out on the horizon, I know it's TBA when Essex will be ready to go forward with pursuing the elementary school. As we've said many times, we are ready to begin that project next year, at least advocating for it. But depletion of reserves over times without a correction and a reinstatement is going to put us in a weakened borrowing position for EES and potentially cost more to taxpayers in the long run due to less favorable interest rates on loans. So those are things to keep. Using reserves kind of, it solves the problem without doing the cuts, but it also creates a different set of problems. So I just feel to be responsible, we need to be aware of them. I'm still comfortable with the pathway for the current point in time. I think we know that we're often able to replenish some of the earmarked reserve funds with things like circuit breaker or by tight management of the budget. We're never going to get to the full $900,000 usage, but we can slow it down with good fiscal management, and Avi is fantastic at that. And the principals and directors are collaborative and support the effort. So we will do everything we can to sharpen the pencil and make sure we're staying tight and keeping the outlay as small as possible. But it's a decision that has consequences, and we just have to think about what we're going to do to correct course going forward.
Thanks, guys. Does anybody on the committee have questions for Pam and Avi?
I do.
Is that Teresa?
It is shocking. I know. Yeah. I just have a couple. So the my head's going, it's late and my head's going in a couple different directions. So I'm going to try and do this clearly. Given the strategies that you just put up on the slide for addressing the gap, and I know this is the same question that comes up every time we do this. If we implement those, knowing what that reserve usage still is for this year, and that it's going to be year over year again to bring us back to level and only grow each year to keep us at level, how many years are we looking at before we are forced into a correction? Is my first question. Assuming that we don't have a sudden need to replace the roof at EES and all at once, like, assuming that we can go just with the general thing here, what do we have?
So I think it's a combination of how low should the reserves go and how high do we want the ask to be for an override.
Yeah.
And that's where they kind of meet in the middle. So if right now, I think, Avi, if my back of the envelope Pam math is correct, the ask is going to be around $900,000 for a correction, because that's the amount of revenue that we're sourcing from the reserves. So I would say we would want to be asking serious consideration for next year, no later than the year after, for a correction.
Okay. So that's something.
Avi, am I off on what your assessment is?
I think the revenue usage is a good plug for what the correction should be. Yes. And I think if we talk about, around $3 million after the planned uses, and the bottom two items on this page are about $500,000. And you see that grows over the time. I think it's plus the 335 that's already in there. So you're pretty close to $900,000. $900,000 going into 3 million, you got about 3 years. Don't forget that there's growth there. So I think that Pam's right.
So then, and again, and this is probably pretty obvious, but it really makes a difference in looking at our EES timing, because if we can avoid this 5 to 10 year $1 million roof replacement, by picking up the thing here, I guess my point in stating that is just for anybody listening that obviously we have to really consider the timing of these things very carefully. But there's just not, I don't know, my head's kind of swirling on this a little bit.
I think as part of the problem is that Pam and Avi make this look too easy. It's not easy to find $600,000 that we feel sort of okay with taking out of reserves. It's actually really big deal. And a lot of people, I mean, I think of some of the school committee members who've rolled off in the last few years who would be kicking and screaming at taking this money out of reserve. So I think we've all been paying attention and we know what needs to happen. And we know that the towns are not willing to go above 3.5%. We had some very firm language from the Essex Board of Selectmen on that. So we're really paying attention to what our towns are saying. Our teachers are, have been working really hard throughout the pandemic. They're looking at other districts who have been able to give bonuses and high COLA increases to the teachers. We're not able to do that because we are having to meet the needs of our towns, and we are having to take all of this money out of reserves. I just think it's it's great work that you guys are able to do to figure out how to make this work, and it's hard, and you make it look easy.
And I remember what I was going to say. And at the same time, Sarah, you spurred this in my head. We have agreed as a committee that this is not the time to be cutting our program. We have students coming out of this COVID crisis. We have, a whole district trying to rebuild right now, and that this isn't the time that we need to be looking at cutting everything out. In fact, the district needs more resources than ever to support the students.
Yeah.
So that's important to not lose sight of.
Yeah, we definitely need all hands on deck right now. It's become really very apparent that we need all of our teachers, we need all of our TAs, we need all of our resources, we need our technology to work, particularly the Wi-Fi. I noticed that seems to be working again, so that's good. So thank you for keeping the wheels on the bus as we move through this year and helping us figure this out. I think that this is a good solution for now, but I think, yeah, we're going to need a revenue correction, and we're going to need to fund a new Essex elementary school. We're going to need to do all those things soon. Anybody else want to weigh in? It's getting a little late. I have them trained. Now it's 8:15. Everybody's ready for bed.
I'll just offer that we can always put together a cut scenario if that's a direction the committee wants to go in. Just looking at $900,000, I think that's what, collectively 12 FTE, and that's not differentiating by types of FTE, but just if you use an average salary of about 80 to 85,000, you're looking at a significant number of people, and that will push us. We get this question each year. Why does that push you into a conversation about elementary foreign language or specialist programs? So if you think about the chart we used very early on in the process, we pretty much outlined what our required spending is going to be, which is core program and special education. So cuts typically will land us in class size reduction and shrinking of discretionary programs. Agreed. That is not where we want to be, but if you feel like we need to lay out what that might look like, we could do kind of a top level of that. I think we've had that discussion before.
Well, I don't need to see what that looks like, and I don't know that anybody on this board needs to see what that looks like, but that is definitely a request that we get from the from people on the town boards. So I think actually if you could take the time to put together a very high level look at what that would look like so that we can share that information, and for me, it's why we're not considering these things, right? But I think that to have what that would look like is helpful information for some of the town board members.
So Sarah, if you've got me trained to be as 8:30 draws, I get ready for bed, but now there are 2 points that I guess I want to make on here. Pam and Avi do make it fairly easy to, at least on many years, have gone through the cuts and manage okay, here's where we can find the savings. And it's my impression is it's not, I was going to say, I don't know zero-based budgeting, but every year it feels like Avi and the district and the principals go through some level of that. I think this year in our presentations, or in our whatever we share with the town boards and any presentations we do at town meeting, I think it is important to preface this year, or to include a preface that next year may be the need for the override. Just because of, as we use reserves every year, like we said 3 years ago or 2 years ago when we first voted to touch reserves, it was only 50,000 then, but that compounds year on year the use of reserves. We do need to refund kind of refund and restabilize the budget. Otherwise, that problem continues to get worse. And I really, it's so the things we need to remind the districts of, or that are the other boards of, the FinComs and the Board of Selectmen, is override potential for next year. The cuts, why we have to do, what these cuts would look like. The last item that came up, and I can't remember, I think it may have been in the handout, was enrollment. And although we've looked at one of the classic arguments that comes up is, oh, but the enrollment is growing. The rate of enrollment drop is decreasing. And it almost, when I looked at it, it feels almost like there's another wave coming up through the elementary schools, or that is starting to build the elementary schools. There's definitely a dip in between. I guess, Pam, Ravi, can you speak to the enrollment and that part of it?
Yeah, and if you let me if people want, I can fish around for the chart. What we're seeing in enrollment is a shift, right? It's shifted upward to the high school. The high school has the last of the bubble, and that's passing through. So we shifted reductions in staffing at the elementary. We moved them up to the secondary where the classes were getting larger. We're not quite seeing yet that the boom is coming, but if history repeats itself, we built a new school, people are going to find their way back. We know we have about 200 and some odd students that aren't accessing the public schools, but exist in our two towns. Does this make it more enticing for them to come back and take the public school option? But that aside, I don't know if Allison is still here. So what we've seen over the past few years is a shift in where the staffing is going, not only to the secondary to address enrollment, but staffing reductions in general ed have shifted to special education to address the increased needs of students. So sometimes when we were able to reduce a classroom teacher through attrition due to enrollment in general ed elementary, that FTE didn't come off the books. It actually moved over to a special ed specialized program to keep students in district and to realize that savings. So a shift in enrollment to the secondary shifted some staff in that direction, and a shift in need among our students shifted staff out of general education and into special education. So there's very few places where we can shed staff unless you look at that outer discretionary layer of elective or specialist programming. That it's good to have, best practice to have, common to have among our neighbors, but that's where you would look for staffing reductions to fund gaps, things that kids don't need to have. You can't take away their special ed services. I would not recommend taking away counseling services at this point in time. So you're going to look at areas that will have impact, but trying to minimize the impact on the necessary and mandated needs.
And Pam, you bring up two very good points there. One is around, we know that we get a lot of pushback, and there's been a group formed in the past year really advocating for some of the, not the specialist services, but the electives around foreign language and arts, which is excellent. There's a bigger base of support for that than there has been. But you also mentioned another interesting word, which was comparisons with our neighbors. And that would probably also be good to include something in the budget package this year, which is that our cost per pupil has historically been around the average of local communities, although the outcomes are typically, by whatever metric you put on them, are typically better. And I don't know how we stand kind of coming out post-COVID, but if it's straightforward or simple to kind of reevaluate that and provide that, that's always been a useful graphic.
Yeah, I think we had that in the Essex presentation. We had the
Okay.
staffing charts and the PPE charts.
Can I see Allison still here, and that slide reminded me of one question I wanted to ask. Can I come back to Allison for a second? Because we're talking a lot about the student needs and the student mental health needs and the coming out of COVID and all of the needs, and the we don't want to, you just mentioned the counselors, and we definitely are utilizing all of our counseling staff, and people are having a lot of issues around missing school or having social emotional needs post or in COVID. And so my question for Allison was, a number of the out of district placements we have are for students with severe mental health needs. And so two parts. One is that, are we having more of that than other people, or is that happening all over the place? And then the other question is that a result of COVID, or is that just a result of our times now for children?
That's a great question. It's definitely not unique to Manchester-Essex. I'm in touch with a lot of other special education directors across the state, and this is an issue that has intensified for every other district that I've spoken to, and I am in touch with many. So that's not unique to us at all. Remind me of the second part of your question.
Oh, is any of it COVID related, or is it just the times?
It is COVID related. Well, part of it's the times and just the stresses that children and adolescents are facing. Seeing more anxiety, more mental health issues from students, but the impact of COVID has been an increase in student mental health issues and the severity of student mental health issues. I'm seeing more students, and of course we're a small district, I'm not talking about huge numbers, but I'm seeing students who are out with mental health issues for extended periods of time. So some of this is in special education, but also some in general education, because I also oversee counseling and work with students who have long-term absences. So absolutely. A parent actually was telling me that they had talked to Children's Hospital, and just has been an exponential increase in students with eating disorders. We know that many more students are experiencing depression because of the isolation that hasn't occurred socially with the pandemic. So we're seeing lower incidence disorders like eating disorders growing exponentially. We're seeing mental health disorders that we more typically see, like depression. We're seeing greater numbers, and the feelings of lack of control, the social isolation that's occurred with the pandemic has absolutely increased the number of students experiencing mental health issues, and also just the severity of the issues that students are facing. In terms of out-of-district placements, I wouldn't say that the pandemic may have had a small impact on the need for out-of-district placements. That hasn't been as significant as just what we're seeing in school. And I'm very grateful that we have our Bridge program for students who've been hospitalized and need support in returning from hospitalization. The demands on that program have increased, and definitely the demands in both special education and general education on students who are in district and their needs. That's where I'm seeing the big increases.
All right, thank you. So from a budget standpoint, it's really important that we keep all of our counseling services in place to help meet the needs of these kids.
I can't speak strongly enough to that particular need. And we did in the Bridge program was able, through restructuring, to add a counselor at the high school. They had just had academic support for students returning from hospitalization. We were relying on the high school adjustment counselor to help with that program, and it really wasn't enough. And the timing couldn't have been better to add a counselor to that program for this year, given just the increased needs that we're seeing.
All right, awesome. Thank you.
Sarah, just a quick note. I think any cuts we make at this point are going to be cuts that are problematic and are going to cause other problems down the line.
Mm-hmm.
And they're not, it is easy on paper to make this all work. It's not hard. What's hard is the decision making about what are we choosing to do to our program, and how are we going to live with the consequences of our choices? So that's why I think right now we're recommending reserves as a bridge to the future, as opposed to beginning to dismantle programming only to try to reinstate it down the line. That's disruptive, and we know kids need established routines, they need predictability, and we don't need to have further upheaval within schools while we're trying to get back to some semblance of normalcy. There's a lot of things we should do different post-COVID, but living in a constant state of the unknown it's not good for anybody. So I think that's why we're recommending the reserves going forward. It comes with its own consequences, and we're just going to have to make the case that we need additional revenue to move forward. I think going through our strategic planning last year, we didn't see any indicators that we were over-servicing the community. I think most indicators pointed to expansion of service, and evolution of service. So not necessarily just to grow, but do some things differently. But nothing is in there to say that we need to be scaling back. I would say the contrary.
Thank you. And then here's the slide that Ken had asked for with the comparable per pupil expenditures.
Excellent. That I'd missed that. Thanks for reminding me on that one.
Problem.
All right.
And we're at the bottom of the first column. Cool.
We're at the
We're
average.
we just are stuck at the bottom, so you can compare us to everything above. It's not a rank.
So the average is right above us. You can see the average is 20,453. We're at 18,837.
And that's the average of those communities.
The average of the high performing districts.
It looks like maybe the average of Cape Ann is a little bit lower than that, but still above where we are.
I can't do that average in my head. It looks like Gloucester is a little bit lower per pupil, and Hamilton, Wenham, and Rockport are both a little higher per pupil.
It's 19,159 is the average for the three Cape Ann towns listed.
Well, did you include us?
Fine.
I think when you look at the numbers, we are basically
19,000. Yeah, we're just under the average.
We're not excessively over or under any community. We're right there. And, those are going to fluctuate based on size of the school and where the teachers fall on the distribution scale.
I know we're getting on in time. The only thing I just would add to that is just, if you're looking at our budget and wondering whether we should be focusing on spending reductions or revenue changes, I think this slide, which we've shown year after year after year, makes the case that generally we have responsible and managed spending. And, we know that this year we're dealing with some mandated costs that are growing above. Maybe those will bump up some of our numbers, but we can point to exactly where they are. So I think for me, it makes it easier to start to get into some of the revenue conversations, which for now as a bridge might be reserves, but starting to have those conversations with the towns, given that I think we've been pretty responsible if you look at these numbers and a lot of the other metrics that we show.
Yeah.
It's probably worth revisiting. We can bring it up on the 25th, but the way we're functioning in running our budget is the comfortable, and maybe not comfortable for all, annual growth number is 3.5%, which is slightly below our real growth number. So we are always suppressing our actual growth, either through some cuts or some reserve use or some creative reprogramming, but we're not growing at our natural rate. It's suppressed. So eventually all those small little chips are going to catch up, and we're going to need a correction. So, the way we're designed is always putting us in a position to be working from behind.
And that's the way the state education funding is designed. It's not the way we're designed. And If we
Well,
really
some
wanted to come in
communities-
at less than 3.5%, we just need to have a really, really big override, and then we can come in at less than 3.5% for a bunch of years in a row.
I don't know that that's the case, Sarah, because I think our natural growth rate is what it is. We're just going to lower the starting point for it, but we're always going to grow faster than 2.5%, and it's going to be somewhere between 3.5 and 4. Isn't that the case, Avi?
But if we want to keep it lower to the towns, I'm sorry, if we want to keep our assessment to the towns lower than 3.5%, then one way to do that would be by having a balloon override instead of one that just plugs our reserve usage.
And as like, I think it's Greg that's brought it up, and it's a planned balloon override every so many years.
Anyway, that is a discussion for another night because it's getting late and I think we're cooked. Does anybody have a school committee comment to end us off? No, not even Teresa has a school committee comment to wrap things up tonight.
It would be a clarifying question.
Tired to think of one.
No clarifying questions? Nothing. We got nothing. Okay, next time we get together will be for a meeting and our final public budget hearing in 2 weeks from today. Right here, online. All right, do I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved, Warnock.
Is there a second?
Second read.
Second, thank you. Okay, I'm gonna go down the roll call. Eric?
Yes.
I think Eric's having connective issues. Oh, good, he's a yes. He's got a little yellow warning sign on his picture. Kate?
Yes.
Chris?
Yes.
Teresa?
Yes.
Ken?
Yes.
I'm a yes.
Thanks all. Have a good night.
Thank you. Have a good
Hey,
night.
everybody.
Well,
Good night.
night, Pam. Night, Ed.